My father forged documents to steal $190,000 from me to fund my brother's influencer career. I spend my days making sure bridges don't collapse. I never expected my own family foundation to crumble. Posted by you/bridgeengineer_betrayed. I'm writing this at 2:47 a.m. because I can't sleep. I've spent the last 3 hours staring at my ceiling, trying to reconcile two completely different realities. The one where I'm a competent professional who catches structural failures before they become tragedies, and the one where I apparently couldn't see the rot in my own family until it was too late. I'm a 26-year-old structural engineer specializing in bridge safety inspections. For the past 4 years, I've worked for a regional infrastructure consulting firm in the Midwest. My job is literally to find weaknesses, hairline fractures in steel beams, erosion around foundations, stress patterns that indicate future failure. I crawl through inspection tunnels, review load calculations, and write reports that determine whether thousands of people can safely cross a river every day. I'm good at my job. Last year, I flagged a critical issue in a 1960s-era overpass that everyone else had missed. The repair work started 6 weeks before my calculations suggested potential failure. My supervisor called it career-defining work. But I couldn't see what was happening right under my own roof. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter from my mortgage lender. It was addressed to me at my condo, a modest 2-bedroom place I bought 3 years ago with a substantial down payment I'd saved since I was 16. The letter informed me that my application for a home equity line of credit had been approved, and that $190,000 had been disbursed to an account ending in 4471. I never applied for a home equity line of credit. I didn't even know my condo had been used as collateral. And I certainly never authorized anyone to take $190,000 from my property. I called the bank immediately. After 2 hours of being transferred between departments, I finally reached someone in their fraud division. She was sympathetic but professional. She walked me through the documentation they had on file. There was a power of attorney document. It bore my signature. There was a notarized authorization form. Also my signature. There were bank statements, tax returns, pay stubs, all supposedly mine, all used to support the loan application. None of it was real. Every single document had been forged. When I asked who had submitted the application, the fraud specialist hesitated. Then she read me the name on the account where the funds had been transferred. Marcus Reiner. My brother. 24 years old. Currently living in an apartment our father pays for while he pursues his dream of becoming a lifestyle influencer. I had to pull my car over because I was shaking too hard to drive. Let me give you some background, because I know people are going to ask. My father, Donald Reiner, is 58 years old. He's been a regional sales manager for a mid-sized manufacturing company for the past 22 years. He's always been comfortable. Company car, expense accounts, quarterly bonuses. Not wealthy, but solidly upper middle class. My parents divorced when I was 12 and Marcus was 10. Dad got the house. Mom moved to Oregon and started over. We stayed with Dad because that's what the custody agreement said, and because honestly, Mom seemed relieved to be free of the whole situation. Dad always had a favorite. I knew it by the time I was 8. Marcus was charming, outgoing, naturally charismatic. I was the quiet one who liked math and spent weekends building model bridges out of balsa wood. Dad would take Marcus to baseball games while I stayed home studying. When Marcus needed money for a class trip, it appeared instantly. When I needed a graphing calculator for AP Calculus, I was told to figure it out. So I did. I got a job at 14, saved obsessively, earned a full scholarship to State University, and graduated with a degree in civil engineering and minimal debt. I bought my condo with money I'd earned and saved myself. I've been financially independent since I was 22. Marcus, meanwhile, dropped out of community college after 3 semesters, cycled through a series of business ventures that Dad funded, and eventually settled on his current pursuit, becoming a wellness and lifestyle influencer. His Instagram has 42,000 followers. His TikTok has about the same. He posts videos about morning routines, productivity tips, and mindset optimization, all from an apartment he doesn't pay for, driving a leased BMW he doesn't pay for, wearing clothes he buys with money he doesn't earn. I always found it frustrating, but I told myself it wasn't my problem. Dad was an adult. If he wanted to enable Marcus, that was his choice. It didn't affect me. Until it did. The bank investigation took 2 weeks. I hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen who specializes in financial fraud cases. She told me that my situation was unfortunately more common than people realize, especially in cases involving family members. The forged documents were sophisticated but not perfect. The notary stamp was from a legitimate notary. But when investigators contacted her, she had no record of ever notarizing anything with my name on it. The signature on the power of attorney matched mine closely but had subtle inconsistencies that a handwriting expert flagged immediately. What made my stomach drop was who the notary worked for: my father's company. Dad had used a notary from his own workplace. He'd submitted forged documents using resources from his employer. And he'd transferred the money directly to my brother's account, no attempt to hide the trail at all. When I confronted him, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. We met at a coffee shop near his office. I chose a public place because Patricia advised me that emotions might run high, and I wanted witnesses. When I showed him the loan documents, he glanced at them like they were mildly interesting articles in a magazine. "It's an investment in your brother's future," he said. "Marcus is on the verge of breaking through. He just needs capital for brand development, professional photography, a marketing consultant, some sponsored content deals. This could turn into millions, and you'll get your money back with interest." I asked him if he understood that he had committed multiple felonies. He waved his hand like I was being dramatic. "You weren't using the equity. It was just sitting there. I'm your father. I'm listed on the original deed as a gift giver. This is a family matter, not a legal one." That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with someone who had made a desperate mistake. I was dealing with someone who genuinely believed he had the right to take what was mine and give it to his preferred child. In his mind, my success existed to subsidize Marcus's dreams. I told him I was pressing charges. He laughed. Actually laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. No one's going to arrest a father for trying to help his sons. Just let Marcus get his brand off the ground, and in 2 years, this will all be paid back. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." I left without another word. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and authorized Patricia to pursue every legal avenue available. The irony isn't lost on me. I inspect bridges for hidden weaknesses, the kind that develop slowly over years, invisible until the moment of catastrophic failure. I look for cracks in foundations, stress fractures in support beams, erosion that undermines everything above it. I never thought to inspect my own family foundation. Update 1. The FBI finds something much bigger. Posted 6 weeks later. I need to update everyone on this situation because it has evolved in ways I never anticipated. When I filed my complaint with the FBI, I expected an investigation focused on the forged loan documents. I expected my father to face charges related to identity theft and fraud. What I got was something much larger. 2 weeks after I filed my complaint, 2 FBI agents came to my apartment. They had questions, not just about the loan, but about my father's employer. Did I know anything about the company's financial practices? Had my father ever mentioned irregularities in expense reporting? Was I aware of any unauthorized accounts or transactions? I told them everything I knew, which wasn't much. My father never discussed work with me in any detail. But their questions painted a picture that was becoming clearer by the day. 3 days after that interview, I saw the news story. My father's company was under federal investigation for corporate embezzlement. According to reports, investigators had discovered a scheme involving falsified expense reports, phantom vendor accounts, and misappropriated company funds totaling over $2.3 million over 6 years. Multiple employees were involved, and the investigation had been triggered, in part, by my complaint. When the FBI looked into how my father had forged the loan documents, they discovered he'd used company resources, specifically, the notary, certain forms, and a printer that left traceable identifiers. Following that thread led them to examine his expense reports, his vendor relationships, and his access to company accounts. It turned out my father had been stealing from his employer for years. Not huge amounts at once, just steady siphons of money through inflated expense reports, fake consulting fees, and vendor kickbacks. The money had been funding his lifestyle, Marcus's apartment, Marcus's car, Marcus's endless business ventures. Everything Marcus had, everything I'd resented quietly for years, had been built on theft. My lawyer called me when the indictments came down. My father was one of 4 employees charged. He faced 6 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of embezzlement, and 1 count of identity theft related to my case specifically. Marcus wasn't charged initially, but investigators had frozen several accounts connected to him. They were examining whether he had known the money was stolen or had participated in laundering it. When the news broke, Marcus called me for the first time in months. I let it go to voicemail. His message was all indignation and accusation. I had ruined everything, I was jealous and bitter, I had destroyed this family out of spite. He didn't mention the $190,000. He didn't acknowledge that he'd benefited from stolen money, both from me and from Dad's employer. In his mind, I was the villain. I saved the voicemail. Patricia said it might be useful later. Update 2. The evidence keeps mounting. Posted 8 weeks later. The discovery phase of my father's case has revealed documentation that makes my stomach turn. Through my lawyer's coordination with federal prosecutors, I've learned the full scope of what happened. My father had been planning the loan fraud for over a year. He'd collected my mail for months, intercepting bank statements and any correspondence that might tip me off. He'd practiced my signature. There were drafts found on his home computer. He'd researched notary procedures and identified which company resources he could exploit. This wasn't a moment of desperation. It was methodical, calculated theft from his own child. The $190,000 went directly to Marcus, as I suspected. But the spending pattern was more grotesque than I imagined. There were receipts for a professional photo shoot that cost $34,000. A brand consultant who charged $45,000 for 6 months of advice. Sponsored content deals that my brother had paid for rather than earned, essentially buying his way into partnerships with companies who were paid to pretend he was influential. There was a $62,000 payment to an agency that promised to increase his follower count and engagement metrics. The agency operated overseas, and federal investigators flagged them for running bot farms and engagement fraud. Half of Marcus's followers weren't real people. They were purchased. His entire influencer career was a Potemkin village built on stolen money and fake metrics. When I learned this, I felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, but it was joined by something sadder, pity. My brother had been handed every advantage, and instead of building something real, he'd constructed an elaborate fiction. He'd never had to develop actual skills because our father had always provided shortcuts. Now those shortcuts had led him off a cliff. Federal investigators also uncovered communications between my father and Marcus. Emails, text messages, recorded phone calls. In one exchange, my father explicitly told Marcus that I wouldn't even notice the loan because I was too focused on work to pay attention to money. In another, Marcus asked if this could blow back on us, and my father assured him that family doesn't press charges against family. They genuinely believed I would simply accept being robbed. That's how little they thought of me. That's how entitled they had become. My lawyer told me that these communications would be devastating at trial. But I barely registered that information. I was too busy trying to process the casual contempt in those messages, the way my father and brother had discussed me like I was an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be respected. Update 3. The walls close in. Posted 10 weeks later. My father's trial was scheduled, but his lawyer convinced him to accept a plea deal. The evidence was overwhelming, not just my case but the corporate embezzlement charges. Fighting would have been futile and expensive. Under the terms of the agreement, he pleaded guilty to 4 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of embezzlement, and 1 count of identity theft. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Marcus's situation evolved differently. He wasn't charged with the original crimes, but investigators had found evidence that he knew the money was stolen. More significantly, they'd uncovered his arrangement with the fake engagement agency. It turns out that buying followers and engagement isn't just ethically questionable. It can constitute wire fraud if you're using those inflated metrics to secure paid partnerships with brands. Marcus had signed contracts with several companies, claiming audience reach and engagement rates that were entirely fabricated. He'd received payment for advertising products to an audience that largely didn't exist. 3 companies sued him for breach of contract and fraud. His accounts were frozen pending civil litigation. Instagram and TikTok both suspended his accounts pending investigation into platform manipulation. Within a week, his BMW was repossessed. His landlord began eviction proceedings. The brand he'd spent years building was revealed as a hollow shell, and everyone who'd invested in it was coming for repayment. I watched this unfold through news reports and my lawyer's updates. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I just observed, with a strange detachment, as the consequences I'd set in motion played out exactly as they should. My mother called me from Oregon. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. She'd seen the news. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry I left you there with him. I knew what he was, and I ran. That wasn't fair to you." I told her she'd done what she needed to survive. I didn't blame her. But I also didn't pretend that everything was fine, that we could have a normal mother-son relationship after years of absence. We talked for about 20 minutes, cautious, honest, neither of us pretending the damage wasn't there. It was a start, maybe. Or maybe just a moment of connection before we drifted apart again. Either way, I felt lighter afterward. I'd spent so long believing I had to fix everything, to hold the family together through sheer force of competence. It was freeing to accept that I couldn't, and more importantly, that I didn't have to. Final update: justice, restitution, and an unexpected phone call. Posted 3 months later. I'm sitting in my condo as I write this final update. The same condo that was nearly taken from me. The same place I bought with years of savings and careful planning. It's late evening, and I'm watching the sun set over the city, and for the first time in months, I feel something approaching peace. My father was sentenced 3 weeks ago. The judge called his crimes a betrayal of institutional and familial trust, and a pattern of entitlement that treated others as resources to be exploited. He received 9 years in federal prison. He'll be eligible for parole in 7, assuming good behavior. At the sentencing, I submitted a victim impact statement. Patricia advised me to write it from the heart, to explain not just the financial damage but the emotional weight of what he'd done. I wrote about the irony of my profession, how I spend my days preventing disasters while missing the one in my own family. I wrote about the messages I'd read, where he and Marcus dismissed me as someone too stupid or distracted to notice theft. I wrote about what it means to learn that your father sees you as an ATM, not a son. I didn't read it aloud. I couldn't. But the judge read it, and referenced it during sentencing. She said that financial crimes often carry hidden costs: broken trust, damaged relationships, the destruction of familial bonds that should have been unbreakable. My father didn't look at me during the proceedings. When they led him away, he kept his eyes forward. I don't know if that was pride or shame. Maybe both. The restitution hearing happened 2 weeks later. Because my father's assets were seized as part of the embezzlement case, and because my case was directly linked to his criminal conduct, I was entitled to compensation from the forfeiture. The $190,000 loan was vacated entirely, declared void due to fraud, removed from my property title. But beyond that, I received restitution from the seized assets. The total, $550,000. I know it sounds like a lot. It is a lot. But it represents what was taken, plus statutory penalties, plus compensation for legal fees, lost time, and the demonstrated pattern of targeting. My lawyer had argued successfully that my father's theft was premeditated and represented a calculated exploitation of familial trust. The court agreed. I've put most of it in conservative investments. I paid off my remaining mortgage. I set aside money for eventual home repairs and infrastructure projects I've been putting off. I'm not living extravagantly, that was never my style. But for the first time in my life, I'm not worried about money. I'm not calculating every expense, anxiously monitoring every account. I have breathing room. At work, things have changed too. 2 months ago, I was promoted to senior structural engineer. My supervisor cited my meticulous approach to documentation and ability to identify critical issues others miss. She didn't mention the personal circumstances I'd been dealing with. I suspect she didn't know the full story. But I know my work improved after everything happened. When your personal life is in chaos, sometimes you throw yourself into the thing you can control. For me, that was bridge inspections. I reviewed data more carefully. I double-checked calculations I would have trusted before. I questioned assumptions. I became better at my job because I learned, through painful experience, that trust has to be verified. Marcus's situation resolved differently than I expected. His assets were seized to settle the civil lawsuits from brands he'd defrauded. His bank accounts, which held what remained of the stolen money, were emptied. His social media accounts were permanently terminated after investigations confirmed platform manipulation. The lifestyle influencer brand was erased entirely. No archives, no backup, nothing to show for 3 years of artificial success. He was ordered to complete 400 hours of community service. He wasn't charged criminally, but the civil penalties were significant enough that he'll be paying off settlements for years. He moved into a friend's basement. He got a job at a warehouse. The BMW, the luxury apartment, the designer clothes, all gone. For a while, I heard nothing from him. I assumed our relationship was permanently severed. I'd made my peace with that. Then, 6 weeks ago, he called. I almost didn't answer. I recognized the number, his new cell phone, a basic prepaid model according to the court records. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up. His voice was different. Smaller. Hesitant in a way I'd never heard from my confident, charming brother. I need to talk to you, he said. Not to ask for anything. I just need to say some things. I could have hung up. Part of me wanted to. But another part, the engineer who believes in understanding systems, even broken ones, said yes. We met at a park. Neutral ground. He looked thinner, older. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a faded sweatshirt. He sat on a bench across from me and didn't meet my eyes for the first 30 seconds. "I rehearsed this," he said finally. "But now that I'm here, it all sounds stupid. I waited. I was wrong. Not just about the money, about everything. About you. About Dad. About what I thought I deserved." He exhaled slowly. "Dad always told me I was special. That normal rules didn't apply to me. That the world owed me things because I was talented and charismatic. I believed him because it was easier than working." He looked up then. His eyes were red-rimmed. "You know what I realized, doing community service? Picking up trash along the highway, sorting donations at a food bank? I realized I'd never actually done anything. Ever. Everything I had was given to me. The apartment, the car, the money, even the followers, they were bought. I built nothing real." I asked him why he was telling me this. What he wanted from me. "I don't want anything. I don't deserve anything from you. I just needed you to know that I understand now. Dad's favoritism didn't help me, it broke me. It taught me that I could take instead of earn. That shortcuts were always available if I just asked the right person. And when you wouldn't be that person, when you actually stood up for yourself, I thought you were the one being unfair." He laughed bitterly. "That's insane, right? You worked for everything you had. You warned me years ago that Dad's help wasn't healthy. And I thought you were just jealous. I told him I'd been angry for a long time. That watching him receive everything while I scraped for every achievement had built resentment I tried to hide. That when the loan theft happened, it felt like the final confirmation of what I'd always suspected, that I was an afterthought to our father, a resource rather than a child." Marcus nodded. "I'm sorry. Those words aren't enough. I know they're not. But I'm trying to mean them. I'm trying to become someone who earns things rather than takes them. I'm trying to understand what you went through, being the son who wasn't favorite. It must have been lonely." It was. But hearing him acknowledge it helped, in a strange way. We talked for almost 2 hours. About our childhood, about our father's manipulation, about the patterns we'd both absorbed. Marcus told me about his community service, how cleaning highways had given him time to think, how working at the food bank had shown him people facing real struggles, not manufactured ones. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said as we prepared to leave. "I'm just asking for the chance to prove I can be different. Maybe in a year, maybe in 5 years. When I've actually done something worth respecting." I told him that was reasonable. That I wasn't ready to trust him, but I wasn't closing the door permanently. That actions would matter more than words. He seemed to accept that. We shook hands, a strange, formal gesture for brothers, but appropriate for the distance between us. I've thought a lot about this experience over the past months. About what it taught me. In my professional life, I look for structural failures. I identify weaknesses before they cause collapse. I understand that buildings and bridges are systems, that every component depends on every other component, and that failure in one place creates stress everywhere. Families are systems too. My family had structural failures going back decades. Our father's favoritism was a crack in the foundation. His willingness to cross ethical lines was corrosion in the support beams. Marcus's entitlement was a stress fracture that grew with every unearned dollar. And I was the inspector who couldn't see the damage because I was too close to it. Because I'd normalized it. Because I told myself that it wasn't my problem as long as I remained independent. But families don't work that way. You can't separate yourself entirely from the structure you were built within. When it collapses, you feel the impact even if you've already moved out. What I've learned is this: distance isn't protection. Boundaries require active enforcement, not just absence. I stayed away from my father and brother for years, telling myself I was independent. But I never established clear boundaries. I never told my father that his favoritism was unacceptable. I never demanded respect. I just withdrew, and assumed that withdrawal was enough. It wasn't. The moment I let my guard down, the moment I failed to monitor my own financial documents carefully, they exploited the opening. Going forward, I'm building differently. I'm verifying trust rather than assuming it. I'm inspecting my own systems with the same rigor I apply to bridges. And I'm accepting that some relationships can't be repaired, only rebuilt from the ground up with different materials. My father will be in prison for years. Whether we'll ever have a relationship again is unclear. Marcus is trying to become someone different. I'll believe it when I see sustained evidence. My mother and I are exchanging occasional emails, slowly building a connection that never existed before. And I'm here, in my condo, with financial security, a career I'm proud of, and the hard-won understanding that the foundations you trust most are often the ones you should inspect most carefully. That's the story. Maybe not the ending I expected. but an honest one. TLDR, father forged loan documents to steal $190,000 from my condo to fund my brother's fake influencer career. Investigation revealed father was also embezzling from his employer. He's now serving 9 years. Brother's fake empire collapsed, assets seized, accounts terminated. I received $550,000 in restitution, got promoted to senior engineer. Brother eventually completed community service and reached out genuinely remorseful, admitting our father's favoritism taught him to take rather than earn. We're not reconciled, but we're talking.